Go back to the second story. It's about my mother. My mother actually died twice. My father also died twice, though in separate instances, years apart. Um, when my mother was hospitalized in a vegetative state after collapsing in the clinic area, she was considered brain dead, and I was called later the next day by the family to make the decision about pulling the plug. Well, what had happened, I was 400 miles away up north, and I was watching television, and I felt some spirit come into the room. And at first I thought this was my father, who had already been dead for many years. And he and I, to this day, 28 and a half years later, still have reunions several times a year that are both auditory and visual. And we have conversations. I get guidance. And so I am, myself, I'm raised in that culture of spirituality and mysticism and communing with spirits, so I'm familiar with that and comfortable with that. I didn't know who this was coming into the room at first, however, and so I closed my eyes and I just kind of opened myself, and I realized that it was not my father, and yet someone close. So I put out my hand and closed my eyes, and I felt my hand being squeezed and my face being stroked, like so. And this went on for a few minutes. And about an hour later, I went to bed. And then during the course of the night, I had several visitations from my mother in dream states or in astral states. And then early in the morning, I got a phone call from my brothers explaining to me what had happened and that they needed me to come down and make a decision. So I came down, and my mother was lying there on the bed, and as I was saying before, she had been defibrillated every several minutes to keep her heart going, but the brain monitors weren't registering any activity. Which again then reflects on this question of consciousness and the brain itself, and how do they fit together, which hopefully we'll have a chance to go further into. I walked up to my mother and I just simply said, "Mama, I know it's time for you to consider where you're going and what you're doing. If you are ready to go across, it's fine with me, and I would help it be fine with all of us in the family." I said, "However, if it's not your time to go over, if you decide that you're ready to come back, then I would like you to consider something, because if you come back, you're going to have to come back under different rules." And I said, "Rule number 1 is no smoking." I said, "Rule number 2 is no drinking. Rule number 3 is only healthy living. And rule number 4 is that we must all and will do a much better job at looking after you as your children." I said, "Now, if you're willing to come back under those rules, we're happy to have you back. And if not, if you feel it's time for you to move on, then please just hang on long enough for everybody to get here." Because we had relatives coming from New York, from Washington, Texas, all over the place. Just hang on a few more hours, and then we'll all get here, and we'll all say goodbye to you, and we'll all pull the plug. Well, what happened was about another 24 hours went by while everybody was trying to come, and they still kept zapping her, and she kept bouncing up out of the bed, and this happened over 165 times, still registering no brain activity. Eventually, the last person to come into the room was my oldest brother, who is a sir, yes sir, militarist, spent 40 years in military life. And he actually walked into the room and looked over at my mother in the intensive care bed with all the tubes and everything else, and he said, "Mama, get up." Just like that, she went right back into her body, her eyes opened up, the brainwave activity resumed, the machines came alive, just like on Star Trek. Now mind you, this is someone who we were just about ready to pull the plug on, who by all medical standards would have been considered dead. Minus any consciousness by medical standards. And yet, upon that command, in responding to her son, her eldest son, her firstborn, she had made up her mind to come back in. She came back in, needed no more cardioversion, no more shocking, and lived another 5.5 years until some other disease processes, largely brought upon by medical mismanagement, brought about her demise. Now, what was key about that for us in terms of understanding, we had learned many things from my father's deaths before, his two previous deaths, where he had gone across and come back, and I had learned much more from my own spiritual journeys. When we think that it is over, it's not over. When we think there's nothing more that we can do, we're generally wrong. Even when they're in the grave and long gone, their spirit is still available to interact with us. There is still energy and there is still consciousness. And in many of the indigenous cultures around the world, of course, there are even duties and assignments that the ancestral spirits have. We have a responsibility, in accordance with many cultures, to communicate with them and direct them. They continue in a realm and in a mode to give further assistance to us to help us resolve some of these issues of the difficulties of walking around and managing this life when we have largely forgotten who we are and what we are made of. So 2 hours after my mother awoke, well, even though she was on a breathing tube, she was able to lift up her hand and she motioned as she wanted to write. And she wrote. We put the pad there and she wrote, "No smoking, no drinking, only healthy living." Spirit is aware, consciousness is there. Whether or not we understand it enough in Western medicine at this point in time, whether or not we are properly advising those who are in deep states of illness or the families that are working around this person who is quite ill, there is so much more yet for us to learn. And I think that personal integrity journey that we have, even a journey of impeccability, is important for us to be on, to learn, as they say in many spiritual traditions, first know thyself. And I think that what we've been talking about is not only how we can help others, but what the process of self-knowing is. Maybe we can take this time and start wrapping up a little bit.
Let me
Maybe
throw
have
one
some
quickie at you in terms of
comments.
consciousness and your firm belief that it lives north of the neck.
Well, I believe it's all there.
There's a story published about working with Dick Clark, my first stroke survivor, and his leg was emaciated, lost a lot of muscle mass, and he couldn't lift it. And I said, "Lift your leg." And he said, "I can't, you stupid, I have a stroke." And I addressed a deeper part of himself. I put my chin right here, and I was really being obnoxious. And I said, "Would you like to kick me in the teeth?" And bam, up came that knee. And he said, "Oh my God, there's parts of me that have nothing to do with my head." There's a story of a young girl who received a kidney transplant from a death row inmate, and after she came conscious, because you never know who your donor is, she said, "The little girl's under the tree here." What are you talking about? The little blonde girl. So they did some research, and they found out that the guy they'd never found the body of the child he'd murdered. They dug up the dead body that the kidney had told her brain about. I think there's a heck of a lot more intelligence in other portions of the system than there is in the head. And consciousness is a very interesting subject.
Yes.
Wrap away, man.
Consciousness doesn't have to, we think it's in the brain, but it exists anywhere. It doesn't need a physical location. It can survive in a physical location, but it does not necessarily need a physical location. That's why, the work you do, you touch somebody, you pick up information, the raw finger, the shiatsu. But it all goes back, I think, is how do you open that up? You keep talking about the reptilian brain. It's interesting because the fifth book in my series of acupuncture books is called Support the Mountain. It's called Support the Mountain. And it's kind of interesting because it's an acupuncture point. English-speaking practitioners call it UB57, urinary bladder 57, but the Chinese call it Chen Shan, which means support the mountain. And it's kind of interesting because they know the name, what it means. Chen Shan means support the mountain, but they don't know why it's called support the mountain. And it's a point behind your calves. And actually what it does is it goes to the back of the head where there's an acupuncture point that goes into the medulla oblongata, which is the reptilian brain. And so the esoteric acupuncture is built upon, okay, the reptilian brain, the root chakra, part of it has to do something, it has to be involved with your consciousness about the food you choose to eat. And this book, it was a 12-year synthesis to come about. And before I wrote it started in 2007, came out in 2008. And at the time, a lot of my ex-students were saying, Dr. Sankey, write a nutrition book. But I was kind of reluctant because there's 50,000 books out there, 100,000 nutrition books. But I said, oh, a little different slant, working with foods for consciousness. And I realized that the mountain that they're talking about is the back of the head. There's a chakra inside the brain called Brahmarandra. And that is the mountain that the foods are going to support. So it all starts with how refined your foods are to help open up other levels of refinement. And people that need certain types of food is fine. You eat whatever you need to eat. But as you refine the quality of foods, you'll see your consciousness opens up to another level. But it all starts with that reptilian brain that you keep talking about, supporting the mountain to move into the next level. And the interesting thing about a mountain is you go toward the top, you find out, wow, it really flips, and there is no top. Later, the top and the bottom are the same, so it's like an endless, massive consciousness out there. But you first start by supporting the mountain, which is reptilian brain, which opens up into everything else with the choices of your food. And I'm a very big advocate of that. One of the things that really gave me impetus to write this book was in 2006, I was at a national convention for acupuncturists. And this woman that invited me to speak there, really nice doctor from Chicago, she kept calling me, and I got calls from Sacramento. Are you going to be at the banquet? Are you going to be at the banquet? It was on a Saturday night. And, me, whenever I speak anywhere, I bring my own food. I don't eat anybody's food. I bring my own little food, and I'll drink the water, that's it. And so I told my wife, it's kind of interesting. They called me maybe 7 or 8 times, wanted me to know if I was going to be at this banquet. And I kept saying, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be there. So on a Saturday, I was supposed to speak on Sunday. Saturday, I get into, it was in Arizona, and there's a note. Will you please meet me in the lobby? I'll show you your room and discuss a few things. So I'm downstairs talking to this woman. She's a very, very knowledgeable, nice doctor from Chicago. She says, are you going to be at the banquet? And I'm thinking, wow. Well, I really didn't want to tell you, but I don't eat your food, And she said, oh, well, the reason we asked you, we're going to give you an award. And I was like shocked, like, wow. So anyway, to make a long story short, I'm sitting at this banquet table, and there's about 10 people on each table. I'm kind of toward the front, to the side. So I'm looking at all the practitioners, and I'm just talking while everybody's eating, and fine, not judging whatever they're eating. But the thing that happened was that at the end, they served dessert. And I'm just looking around, and everybody's eating this piece of cake. And I'm thinking, okay, we're all healers here. A lot of the practitioners are well known in the acupuncture community. We've written books, have done lectures. I'm just looking at everybody eating this cake, and I'm thinking, as a leadership, knowing that there's 4,000 people being diagnosed every day or more with diabetes, and it's a pandemic in America, why are we serving cake to the leadership? We should be serving something else. Doesn't mean we don't need dessert, but they could have had a fruit plate or something. And then I realized, as healers, we need to step up our consciousness another notch also, because it goes back to everything we eat, everything we think, all our thoughts is going through our hands, going through a needle into your clientele, whether it's touching them or thinking them or Reiki or Joe Ray or pranic healing, whatever. All that energy is being transmitted back into your clientele. So that's the genesis of this book, Support the Mountain, which is your choices of foods, which again directly affect the reptilian brain, which affects everything else.
To follow up on a little point, Johnny, Dick Clark's knee, which you were mentioning just a few minutes ago, and the consciousness issue, that's not just in the brain. I remember about 15 years ago, I had a patient. I was at the Center for Mind-Body Medicine at that time, and some famous person, CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, and he checked in on Saturday and checked out